They say words can't break a person. But that's a lie. Because sometimes it's not what's said. It's how they laugh when they say it. I still remember that day. The classroom smelled of chalk and wet notebooks after the morning rain. Everyone was talking, laughing, living in their little bubbles of comfort. And I was just trying to blend in. My shoes were old. My backpack had one broken strap. I thought if I stayed quiet enough, no one would notice me. But they did. She did. She was everything I wasn't. Rich, confident, and untouchable. The kind of person everyone wanted to be near. She walked in late, as usual, her perfume filling the room before her voice did. Her friends lit up the moment she arrived, like stars turning toward the sun. And then her eyes found me. It wasn't a look of curiosity. It was amusement. That kind of quiet, cutting amusement that makes your stomach twist. She tilted her head, smiled, and said, "You really think someone like you belongs here?" The room went silent. Then the laughter came. Small at first, then louder. And louder. Not everyone laughed, but no one stopped her either. I remember forcing a smile, hoping my hands didn't shake. I didn't look at her again. I didn't have to. That sound stayed with me. That laughter carved itself into me like a scar that would never fade. When I stepped into the hallway, I could still hear it echoing behind me. Every step I took felt heavier. I wasn't angry, not yet. Just broken, embarrassed, powerless. But sometimes that's where real stories begin. In the quiet, after humiliation. That evening, I went straight to my job at a tiny grocery store. I stocked shelves, mopped floors, and smiled at people who looked through me like I was invisible. I counted every coin carefully before catching the bus home. That night, as I lay on my thin mattress staring at the cracked ceiling, her laughter came back again, over and over, until something changed inside me. It started small, a spark, a question. What if I don't let this define me? I didn't sleep much that night. Instead, I made a silent promise to myself. I would become someone worth remembering. Not to impress her, not to prove her wrong, but to prove that I was more than that moment. From the next morning, I started living differently. When I woke up tired, I reminded myself why I was doing this. When people ignored me, I let their silence push me harder. Every insult became fuel. Every laugh became a lesson. I studied whenever I could, borrowed books, free online courses, anything that could help me grow. I failed more times than I can count, but every failure taught me how to stand taller. I learned to save, to build, to think long term. While others spent weekends partying, I spent mine planning, dreaming of a life where I didn't have to hide. Years passed, the pain faded, but the memory stayed sharp. And that promise? It grew into a mission. One day, I overheard someone say her family business was struggling. I didn't think much of it then. But that small piece of news, it stuck with me. Fate has a strange way of circling back. I didn't know it then, but the same girl who once mocked me for being poor, the same girl who made me doubt everything about myself, would one day sit across from me in a boardroom, not knowing I was the man who now owned her company. But that's another part of the story. For now, this is where it began, in a classroom filled with laughter that tried to break me, but built me instead. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't loud. It's quiet. It's patient. It's the moment you walk back into the room they once laughed you out of, and you're the one signing their paycheck. And when that day finally came, I didn't need to say a word. The silence said it all. They say time heals everything. Maybe that's true for some people. But for me, time didn't heal anything. It just sharpened the memory. The world moved on after that day. People forgot the laughter, the whispers, the looks. But I couldn't. It replayed in my head, her words, her smirk, that sting of being called less. It became the voice that followed me everywhere. When others heard silence, I heard her. When I failed, I heard her. When I felt tired, I heard her. And every time I did, I pushed harder. Life after school wasn't kind. I didn't have family connections or a safety net. What I had were long nights, short paychecks, and endless rejection letters. I worked wherever I could, washing dishes, unloading boxes, fixing broken shelves at a hardware store. There were days when my hands were covered in dust, my body aching, and I wondered if I was even moving forward at all. Some nights, I'd look at the sky after my shift and whisper to myself, "One day, they'll know my name." But deep down, it wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about worth. I just wanted to prove that I was more than what they saw, more than a poor boy with torn shoes and a dream no one believed in. Still, there were moments that nearly broke me. When rent was late and the landlord threatened to lock the door. When my old laptop finally died, taking my saved work with it. When I saw my old classmates posting pictures of success while I could barely afford bus fare. Every setback whispered, "You'll never make it." And yet that same voice, the one that once mocked me, kept pushing me to prove it wrong. One evening, after a long shift at the store, I stopped by a quiet cafe to rest. I didn't have money for coffee, so I just sat there with a glass of water, scrolling through business articles on a cracked phone. That's when I overheard an older man at the next table talking about startups, how ideas can change lives, how small beginnings can turn into empires. Something about his words caught me. He noticed me listening, smiled and said, "You look like someone who's got something to build." I laughed softly. "I've got dreams, sir. Just not the money to chase them." He leaned forward and said something I'll never forget. "Money doesn't start ideas. Grit does." His name was Mr. Rahman, a retired entrepreneur who now mentored small business owners for free. We started talking more often. He told me stories of how he once failed, how he almost gave up, and how he rebuilt from nothing. For the first time, I had someone who didn't laugh at my dreams. He became the voice that replaced hers. Under his guidance, I began to learn, not just how to work hard, but how to work smart. I read books on business, watched tutorials late at night, and saved every extra coin I could. I started noticing things at my job. What products sold fast, how customers behaved, what the store lacked. That's when it clicked. An idea. People around my area wanted small household items, but most stores sold them at high prices. So I began buying them wholesale from online vendors and reselling them through social media at fair prices. It started small, just a few orders from neighbors and coworkers. At first, it barely made a difference, but then one weekend, I got 20 orders in a single day. That feeling, seeing people trust me, watching my small effort grow, it changed something inside me. For the first time, I wasn't surviving, I was building. I still remember walking past the mirror that night. For the first time in years, I looked at myself and smiled. Not because I had money, but because I had proof. Proof that I could start something. Proof that I was not the person they thought I was. The world still didn't notice me. I wasn't rich, not yet, but I didn't care. Every sale, every late-night delivery, every satisfied customer felt like a silent victory. And though her laughter still echoed in my head sometimes, it didn't sting anymore. It motivated me. Each time I shipped a package, I imagined that laughter fading, softer, weaker, until it was just noise in the distance.
That small business was the seed of something greater. I didn't know it yet, but it was the first stone in a road that would lead me back to her world. Only this time, I wouldn't be standing at the back of the room. I'd be at the front, the one running it. I didn't tell anyone about my plans, not my coworkers, not even my closest friend. I wanted my success to speak for itself. And when it finally did, when the tables finally turned, I wanted that moment to be quiet, poetic, undeniable. That night, as I closed my notebook filled with orders and goals, I whispered one more promise to myself. The world might have moved on, but I haven't. Not yet. Because some memories don't fade. They fuel you. They guide you. They remind you why you started. And mine was just beginning. Success doesn't arrive with a knock. It sneaks in when you're too tired to expect it and too stubborn to quit. I didn't wake up one day as a businessman. I became one, piece by piece, mistake by mistake, night by sleepless night. My small online business began to grow, but it wasn't the fairy tale people imagine. Orders came late, suppliers overcharged, and sometimes I delivered packages myself because I couldn't afford help. There were nights when I'd sit in front of my old laptop, the screen flickering, wondering if I was chasing a dream or running from a memory. And still, I couldn't stop. Her words, "You really think someone like you belongs here?" echoed every time I thought of giving up. Those words became my alarm clock, my driving force, my reason to keep breathing when everything went wrong. There were days when it all nearly collapsed. Once a shipment worth months of savings got delayed indefinitely. The supplier blamed customs, the customers blamed me, and I sat there staring at a spreadsheet full of red numbers. I remember gripping my hair, fighting the urge to give up. But then I thought, this can't be where it ends. So I stayed up all night calling vendors, convincing them to trust me one more time. I delivered half the orders myself, walking miles in the rain, pretending not to care that my shoes were soaked. By dawn, my clothes were cold and heavy, but my heart burned like fire. I made it through that week. Barely, but I made it. Each failure became a brick. Each rejection a lesson. Each small success a light in the dark. But life loves testing people right when they start to rise. I met Rafiq, my first business partner. He was charming, confident, and seemed to believe in me when no one else did. We started expanding together. He handled marketing, I focused on logistics. We shared late-night noodles and big dreams. I trusted him like a brother, until the day he vanished. One morning, I logged in to find the company funds drained. The account was empty. The website I built had been redirected to a new name, his name. He took everything. I remember sitting there, staring at the empty balance, my hands trembling. All those nights, all that effort, gone in one move. I wanted to scream, to break something, but I didn't. Instead, I just sat in silence. That silence taught me more than any book could. It told me that sometimes betrayal isn't your ending, it's your turning point. So I rebuilt, from scratch. I started smaller this time, but smarter. I learned to protect myself. I studied contracts, digital security, branding. I became the kind of person who could survive betrayal and still move forward. And slowly, things changed. Months passed, and orders doubled again, then tripled. I hired my first employee, a shy teenager who reminded me of myself years ago. I taught him everything I knew. Watching him grow gave me a strange kind of peace. One by one, I opened new branches. Not fancy offices, just simple functional spaces filled with energy and purpose. The company that began with a second-hand phone and borrowed ideas turned into a growing brand people actually trusted.
There were moments that felt unreal. Signing my first contract with a national supplier, seeing my products on shelves, hearing people mention my brand without knowing I was behind it. The same city that once ignored me now looked at me with respect. Some even called me sir. And yet, deep inside, something still felt missing. I had the money, the team, the success. But no matter how high I climbed, that one memory still followed me. That laugh, that look of disbelief. Sometimes late at night, when the office lights dimmed and everyone went home, I'd sit alone at my desk. I'd stare at the skyline, thinking about how far I'd come. I should have felt proud. And I did. But I also felt empty. Because it wasn't victory I wanted. It was closure. One evening, while scrolling through business news, I saw a headline that stopped me cold. A company, her company, was struggling. The same girl who once mocked me for being poor now led a business on the edge of collapse. I stared at the screen for a long time. My heart didn't race. I didn't smile. I just felt quiet. Was this fate? Was this my chance to finally face her? I leaned back in my chair, thinking about everything it took to get here. The sleepless nights, the betrayals, the failures, the lessons. Every scar had brought me to this exact moment. The boy she laughed at was gone. In his place stood a man who had built his own world, from dust, from pain, from determination. And now that world was powerful enough to touch hers. But this time I wouldn't be walking into a classroom. I'd be walking into a boardroom. And she wouldn't be laughing. That night, as I looked at my reflection in the dark window, I whispered to myself, I made it. But this isn't the end. Because success without peace isn't victory. It's just survival. And I didn't survive all this just to feel empty. I wanted the truth. I wanted to see her eyes when she realized who I'd become. Not to humiliate her, not to hurt her, but to show her that sometimes the people you look down on are the ones who rise the highest, and that realization, that quiet justice, was worth more than any fortune I had ever earned. They say the past always finds a way back, not with a warning, but with quiet footsteps that catch you when you least expect it. For years, I had buried her name deep in the corners of my mind. I told myself I'd moved on, that her laughter no longer mattered, that the boy she once humiliated was long gone. And for a while, I believed it. I was running a company now. My days were full of meetings, decisions, and deadlines. People looked to me for guidance, respect, even admiration. I had everything I thought I wanted: success, comfort, and control. But fate has a strange sense of timing.
One morning, my assistant walked in with a stack of applications. We were expanding, hiring new managers for our regional branches. I flipped through the papers, scanning names, experiences, cover letters. And then it was there. Her name. It hit me like a cold wind. My fingers froze halfway through turning the page. I stared at the letters, the familiar curve of her signature, the name I hadn't said aloud in years. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My heart pounded in a way I hadn't felt since those early struggling days. Was it really her? I checked the resume again. The same city, the same university, the same confident tone in the writing, though this time the confidence felt
There was something different in the way she described herself. Words like seeking stability, rebuilding, adapting after loss. It didn't sound like the girl who once owned every room she walked into. I leaned back in my chair, my eyes fixed on the name. A part of me wanted to toss the file aside, pretend I never saw it. Another part couldn't look away. It was like time had folded in on itself, bringing me back face to face with the ghost I thought I'd buried. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by my office window, city lights flickering below like restless stars. I thought about her, about the way she laughed that day, how it had shaped everything that followed. I wondered what she would think if she knew the man I'd become, if she'd recognize the boy she once dismissed as nothing. But what haunted me most wasn't anger. It was curiosity. What happened to her? How did someone so sure of herself end up here, applying for a job at my company? I opened my laptop and started searching. Her name brought up old photos, college reunions, charity events, business launches. She had built a company of her own once. The articles called her a rising star, an ambitious visionary. But as I scrolled further, the headlines began to change. Company faces financial trouble. Investors pull out. Founder missing from recent appearances. I felt a strange mix of shock and sympathy. She had built something and lost it. The empire she once flaunted was now dust. In one photo, she stood on a stage smiling, but her eyes told another story. They looked tired, lonely. For a moment, I didn't see the girl who mocked me. I saw a woman fighting to hold herself together. It's strange how life works. Back then, she had everything, and I had nothing. Now, it was the other way around. Over the next few days, I couldn't get her out of my mind. I read every article, every report. The deeper I looked, the clearer the picture became. Her company had collapsed after a string of bad deals. Her investors abandoned her. Her name, once admired, was now whispered with pity. Somewhere in that downfall, I saw my own reflection, the same desperation, the same hunger to prove something to the world. The difference was, I had learned to rebuild. And now, fate was handing me a chance to see if she could do the same. When the interview schedule came out, her name was on it. I told my assistant I'd personally oversee that round. He looked surprised, but didn't ask why. I told myself I wanted to be fair, just another applicant. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. I wanted to see her, to see how time had changed her, to see if she would recognize me. That thought alone sent a shiver down my spine, not of fear, but of something heavier, nostalgia maybe.
because no matter how much I tried to deny it, she was part of my story, the one who unknowingly started it all. And now, after all these years, our paths were crossing again, not in a classroom, not in a hallway, but in an office I built from scratch. As I looked at her file one last time, a quiet smile crept across my face. Not out of pride, not even satisfaction, but realization. Everything had come full circle. The boy who once walked away in silence now had the power to decide her future. And yet, all I felt was calm. I closed the folder gently and whispered to myself, fate finally brought her back, but this time, I was ready. They say revenge is sweet, but the truth is, real revenge isn't loud. It's silent, patient, and precise. It doesn't shout for attention. It simply waits for the perfect moment to arrive. And mine had just arrived. After all these years, fate had placed her name right in front of me. The same woman who once laughed at me for being poor, now applying for help from the empire I built from nothing. But this wasn't about hurting her. No, this was about justice. Poetic justice.
That night, I sat alone in my office, city lights glowing beyond the glass. The world outside moved fast, but inside, everything was still. I looked at her file once more, reading every detail. Her business background, her losses, her debts, her desperate attempts to save what little she had left. Her company, once considered unstoppable, was now drowning. Investors had pulled out, employees were leaving. Bankruptcy loomed like a storm cloud. And in that moment, I made my decision. I wouldn't just reject her application. I would own her company. Quietly. Completely. I didn't want to destroy her. I wanted her to see what true power looked like. The kind that doesn't humiliate, but humbles. The plan began the next morning. Through one of my smaller firms, one she would never trace back to me, I started buying small shares of her company. Piece by piece, month by month, I became a silent shadow in her boardroom. I didn't move fast. Fast was risky. I moved smart. Every investment was hidden behind layers of anonymity. My lawyers knew better than to ask questions. I gave them one rule: keep my name out of it. At first, no one noticed. Her company was desperate for funding. She accepted the investments without hesitation, believing it was her second chance, a lifeline from some generous backer. But every lifeline comes with a hook, and this one had mine. Weeks turned into months. I watched from the background as she tried to revive her sinking business. She smiled in interviews, gave hopeful speeches, and posted motivational quotes online. To the world, she looked determined, but I could see it, the cracks behind her confidence. Her company was already mine. She just didn't know it yet. One evening, I sat with my financial advisor reviewing the final papers. He looked at me with disbelief. "Sir," he said, "with this next acquisition, you'll own controlling shares. You'll have full authority over her company." I signed the document slowly, the pen steady in my hand. It wasn't excitement I felt. It was something deeper. Closure, maybe. Because in that moment, I wasn't the boy from the back of the classroom anymore. I was the man she never believed I could be. The next day, I walked into the headquarters of her company, not as a guest, not as a stranger, but as its new, silent owner. The office was smaller than I expected. The walls were lined with photos of her early achievements, smiling faces, awards, and headlines that once called her a visionary leader. But time had faded the shine. The receptionist looked tired. The air smelled like stress and cold coffee.
I stood there for a moment, remembering the days she laughed at me, how powerless I felt back then. Now, power was standing quietly in the same room, wearing my suit. I didn't announce who I was, not yet. I wanted her to find out the way I had always imagined, unexpectedly, unprepared, undone by her own arrogance. That night, I received an email from her. She was thanking her new investor for believing in her company. She wrote that this investment meant everything, that it was her final chance to rebuild, to prove herself. I stared at that message for a long time. I could almost hear her voice again, not laughing this time, but grateful, for help that came from the very person she once looked down on. It was almost poetic. I replied simply from my anonymous account, "Keep doing your best. The future has a way of surprising us." Days later, my lawyer called. "All documents are finalized," he said. "You officially own a majority stake. Her board will receive the announcement next week. Once it's made public, she'll have no choice but to report to the new owner." I thanked him and hung up. Then I leaned back in my chair, letting the silence fill the room. After years of hard work, after endless nights of struggle, everything had come full circle. I had built an empire from dust, and now that empire had quietly swallowed the one belonging to the woman who once mocked me for having nothing. The universe has a way of settling old debts. Not with anger, not with shouting, but with timing. As I turned off the office lights and looked out over the city, one thought whispered in my mind. Soft, calm, final. She has no idea that her past just came back for her. And soon she would walk into that boardroom confident and unaware, not knowing the person sitting across from her, the one she once laughed at, now held every string. Fate had brought her back, and this time I was the one pulling the strings. They say life always comes full circle, but no one ever tells you how quiet that circle feels when it finally closes. The morning of the meeting felt calm, unnervingly calm. The sun was out, the sky was clear, but yet the air inside the boardroom carried a strange kind of tension, like the moment before a storm. I sat at the head of the long table, papers neatly stacked, waiting. The hum of the air conditioner was the only sound in the room. My heart didn't race. My hands didn't shake. I had imagined this day for years, the moment I'd finally face her again, and now that it was here, I felt nothing but stillness. My assistant entered. "Sir, the meeting is about to begin. The former CEO has just arrived." I nodded. "Send her in." The door opened, and there she was. She walked in with that same confidence I remembered, chin high, smile polished, every movement carefully measured. But something in her eyes was different now. The sparkle was dimmer. The pride had turned into something more fragile, like glass pretending to be diamond. She didn't recognize me at first. Why would she? The boy she once mocked in a torn jacket now sat in a tailored suit, owning the very company she built. "Good morning," she greeted. Her voice calm but rehearsed. "I'm here to meet the new owner." I gestured toward the seat across from me. "You already have." She frowned slightly, confused. "I'm sorry, have we met before?" I smiled, not cruelly, but with quiet strength. "Once, a long time ago." Her eyes searched mine, trying to place the face. I saw it happen, the flicker of recognition, the widening of her eyes, the slow gasp she tried to hide. "You," she whispered.
It can't be." But it was. The room went silent. Every second stretched longer than it should have. She stared at me like she was staring at a ghost, the ghost of someone she thought she had buried in the past. I didn't gloat, I didn't smirk. I just looked at her, calm and steady. "Yes," I said quietly. "It's me." Her hands trembled as she set her files down. You own this company?" "I do. Every part of it." Her face fell. The realization hit her like a weight she couldn't lift. Everything she once controlled was now in the hands of the very person she laughed at, the person she dismissed as nothing. For a moment, she said nothing. Her eyes glistened, not with pride, but with regret. The air grew heavier. I don't know what to say," she murmured. I never imagined that one day I'd be the one sitting here," I finished softly. She nodded, her voice breaking. I was young, arrogant. I didn't know what my words could do."
I leaned forward slightly, but I did. I remembered every one of them. Her gaze dropped. "If this is about revenge, then I understand." I shook my head. "No, I'm not here to humiliate you. Life already did that. To both of us, in different ways." She looked up, confused. "I didn't build this company to get even," I said. "I built it because your laughter gave me a reason to start. You were the fire that forced me to rise." The words hung in the air. Not sharp, not bitter, just honest. She wiped a tear quickly, trying to keep her composure. "So what happens now?" she asked quietly. I stood up, buttoning my jacket. "What happens now is up to you." Her eyes met mine again. "You're not firing me?" "No," I said, walking toward the door. "You've lost enough already. Sometimes the best revenge is forgiveness, because it's the one thing they never expect." She looked stunned, speechless, almost unable to move. I paused at the door, turning slightly to face her one last time. "You once taught me that respect couldn't be bought. But today, I learned that forgiveness can't be sold." And with that, I left the room. Behind me, she sat alone, silent, shaken, and maybe for the first time, humbled. As I walked down the hallway, I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel triumph. I felt peace. Because in the end, real victory isn't about seeing someone fall. It's about standing tall, without ever needing to push them down. And that was the day I finally let the past go. They say revenge feels sweet, but standing there that day, looking at her, it didn't feel sweet at all. It felt heavy, like holding a victory that didn't fit in my hands. After the board meeting, I stayed behind. Everyone had left except her. She sat at the far end of the table, motionless, staring down at the company logo printed on the folders. It was the same company she built, and now the same one she just learned I owned. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The silence between us wasn't angry. It was full of memories, years, and things we both wished we could undo. Finally, she looked up, Her voice trembled. "I don't know where to start. Maybe with sorry." I didn't respond. I wanted to hear her. Really hear her. She took a shaky breath. "You know, life has a cruel sense of humor. After college, everything I touched seemed to turn to gold. Investors, awards, success, it all came so easily. I thought I was untouchable." She laughed bitterly. "And then one mistake, one wrong deal, and everything I built started falling apart. People I trusted disappeared overnight. The same friends who used to praise me stopped answering my calls." Her voice cracked. "I lost my company, my reputation, even my confidence. For the first time, I understood what it meant to be looked down on, the way I once looked down on you." She wiped her tears quickly, trying to stay composed. "I used to think strength meant never falling, but now I know strength is when you fall and still find a way to stand up again." I watched her, and for the first time, I didn't see the arrogant girl from the past. I saw a person, broken, humbled, and human. Inside me, two voices began to fight. One whispered, "She deserves this. Let her feel what you felt." The other said, "You've already won. Don't become the person she once was." I looked around the room. The walls, the table, the success I'd built from nothing. I had spent years chasing this moment, thinking it would make me feel powerful. But power without peace is just another kind of prison. She looked up again, her eyes red but honest. "I don't expect forgiveness," she said softly, "but I wanted you to know I remember what I said to you back then, and I've regretted it every day since." I took a deep breath. "You were right about one thing," I said quietly. "The world doesn't hand people like me anything. I had to earn it, piece by piece. But what you didn't see back then was that your words didn't break me. They built me." Her eyes widened, confusion mixing with relief.
I didn't come back to destroy you, I continued. I came back to show you that you can't measure a person's worth by where they start. Because life changes, people grow, and sometimes the ones you underestimate end up becoming everything you thought they couldn't. Tears rolled down her face again. "You're a better person than I ever was," she whispered. I shook my head gently. "No, I just learned what pain can teach, if you let it." The room went quiet again. I could see it in her eyes, the weight of understanding, the sting of guilt, and the strange peace that comes after accepting the truth. I stood up and picked up my briefcase. "You'll stay on," I said. "Not because I owe you, but because everyone deserves a second chance." She looked stunned. "You'd trust me again? After everything?" I smiled faintly. Trust isn't given. It's earned. Just like respect. Start over. The right way this time. As I walked toward the door, she called after me. "Why?" she asked. "After what I did to you, why show mercy?" I paused and turned slightly, meeting her eyes one last time. "Because," I said softly, "the best revenge is showing you never needed one."
And with that, I walked away, leaving her in silence, surrounded by everything she once owned, now wiser than she had ever been. That day, I didn't just win back my pride. I found something greater: peace. Because true power isn't in breaking others. It's in knowing you could, but choosing not to. They say every story of revenge eventually ends, not when the other person falls, but when you finally rise above the need to see them fall. After that day, everything changed. Not just for her, but for me too. For the first time in years, I felt a strange kind of peace. The anger that once kept me awake at night was gone. The pain that had pushed me forward for so long had finally settled, not because I got even, but because I finally understood what it all meant. Pain is a teacher, and I had learned every lesson it had to offer. In the weeks that followed, she stayed with the company, quietly, humbly. The same woman who once laughed at me now came to work early, treated everyone with kindness, and never once tried to show off again. Sometimes I'd watch her from a distance during meetings. No pride in her tone, no ego in her voice, just effort. Real, honest effort. It was strange. For years, I had imagined what it would feel like to watch her lose everything. But watching her rebuild herself, that was something else entirely. It wasn't satisfying. It was inspiring. Because I realized redemption is more powerful than revenge. As for me, my empire continued to grow. But this time, I led differently. I treated my employees with respect. I made sure no one in my company ever felt small the way I once did. I started visiting schools and community programs, helping students who reminded me of myself, the ones who didn't have much but dreamed big anyway. I told them that sometimes failure isn't the end. It's just the test before life opens the next door. Each time I spoke, I thought back to that classroom, to that laugh. And I silently thanked it. Because without it, none of this would exist. One evening, months later, I got an email from her. She had decided to start something new, a mentorship program for young entrepreneurs, especially those who came from humble beginnings. She wrote that she wanted to give others the chances she once took for granted. At the end of her message, she wrote, "Thank you for teaching me what real success looks like." I stared at that line for a long moment and smiled, because that was the real ending. Not a battle won, but a soul healed. Time went on, and life found its rhythm again. The world forgot our story, but we never did. It wasn't just a story of revenge anymore.
It was a story of growth, of forgiveness, of two people who learned the same truth in very different ways. And that truth is simple. Success isn't about money, status, or revenge. It's about becoming the person you once wished others saw in you. It's about walking into the same room that once laughed at you and realizing you don't need to prove anything anymore. Because the moment you let go of the need to win against others, you finally win for yourself. Success isn't about proving them wrong. It's about proving yourself right. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful tales of betrayal, redemption, and justice. Because every story has a lesson, and sometimes the best revenge is growth.